Ambassador Carmen, let me start with you first. What the international community, and you heard what Antonio Guterres, the UN Secretary General, has been saying, other ambassadors, particularly in the Gulf Arab countries, have been saying at the UNSC, that Israel cannot go in with this blank check, that Israel has to follow the rules of war. My question to you is, clearly Hamas or Lashkar-e-Taiba or Boko Haram or Al-Qaeda are not following these rules of war, but civilized states, states which believe in the rule of law, there is a higher standard expected of them, or at least that was the subtext of the debate that happened in the UNSC. How do you respond to that?
Well, first, let me go back to yesterday's statement by the Secretary General. The Secretary General of the United Nations is expected not to give interpretations of his own and not to take sides and not to tell under which umbrella or vacuum or non-vacuum these atrocities were committed. And I don't have to tell you, you've seen all the videos, what atrocities have been committed. The same United Nations cannot, up to date, even define what terror is. We all know what terrorism is.
Yep.
Terror is terror is terror. Definitely India knows what terror is. Israel knows what terror is. But the United Nations have not up to date defined it. And by the way, there is a big Indian effort to lead a process of defining what terrorism is, but it's unsuccessful, and I think it shows something about the United Nations and its efficiency. I'm not in government anymore, and I have to tell you that I suggested in my tweet, if I may say so, our foreign minister not to go to the Security Council. It was a hopeless debate. We didn't think the Secretary General would speak that badly about almost justifying what happened with Hamas on the 7th of October. But he did go, he did speak, he did cancel the meeting with the Secretary General. I know that the Secretary General has tried to correct himself today, but he hasn't apologized. We definitely expect an apology from a Secretary General of an organization where we are stakeholders and shareholders exactly as any member state.
Okay.
A deficiency, one more sentence, please. A deficiency of the international community, and I think you hinted to it, that there are rules of war, but the non-state actors in the rules of war are not treated as they should be. And the international community should make a big effort to adjust to the new kind of battlefield. And the new kind of battlefield, and you know it in India, is also terrorism.
So let me ask Navdeep Suri this. It's no one's case, Ambassador Suri, that there is no political underlying cause. Howsoever justifiable the political underlying cause may be, what is unjustifiable, what is almost unconscionable, is kidnapping 85-year-old grandmothers, is killing young 6-year-old baby Moshe's parents, both of them in front of his eyes. Clearly, no cause in the world justifies that kind of action. And the point that Ambassador Carmen made, I think it's well taken. India has been pushing for this. Surely the international community can come together to agree that this is terrorism and this is unacceptable. Whether Hamas carries it out, or Lashkar-e-Taiba carries it out, or Boko Haram carries it out, or Al-Qaeda carries it out, you cannot attack innocent, non-combatant civilians, howsoever justifiable you have a political grievance. Ambassador Suri.
So I think there's zero justification for terrorism, and what Hamas did was an absolutely abhorrent act of terror. Let's not dispute that. Let's use that as the starting point. I also want to compliment the work that Ambassador Daniel Carmen has been doing on the side for the hostages that are still held by Hamas. But I think the point that I have been trying to make is that states are held to a different standard because they have signed up to international conventions that terrorist organizations are not liable for. States sign up to the Geneva Convention, states sign up to other international agreements on how civilians are to be treated in a war situation. And I think that's where part of the debate. The debate is not whether Hamas is a terrorist organization or not. The debate is not on what Hamas did was a terrorist act or not, but what next? We know it was a terrorist act. But does Israel, as a responsible, civilized state, deserve to be held to a higher standard than a terrorist organization? And I believe that for the respect that we have for Israel, it should be held to a higher standard. And this is something that many in Israel are saying, that we need to be different from the terrorists.
Absolutely. If I may, and I want to come to the wall to just bring in a bit of an intervention there. I absolutely agree with you that the rules that govern nation states, the civilized world, has to be to a higher level than the rules by which terrorist organizations operate. I absolutely agree with you on that. The problem is also, Ambassador Suri, that these terrorist organizations do not operate in vacuum. Clearly, we know here in India, and we've been at the receiving end of this, that Lashkar-e-Taiba is supported actively by a state actor, right? Similarly, Hamas, although neither the Israelis nor the Americans have put out any evidence in the public domain yet, but the scale of those attacks that we saw on October 7th, Hamas has not acted in isolation. Clearly, there were state support for Hamas from some players in that region. Again, I don't want to name countries. What happens to that? What happens to the state actors? Yes, the non-state actors don't have to play by the rules that civilized states have set for themselves. But what about the state support that these organizations get, Ambassador Suri?
So I think without naming it, you are suggesting Iran, and I think there is enough circumstantial evidence to indicate that Iran's hand is behind Hamas. We will debate for some time to come whether they actually green-lighted the terrorist attack, whether they provided logistical support or whatever. But Iran is already under a whole slew of international sanctions. Iran is under US sanctions for a variety of reasons. There's the whole issue about Iran's nuclear program. Beyond Iran's nuclear program, there's the whole issue of its interference in the affairs of its neighbors, starting from Saudi Arabia to Bahrain to UAE to Iraq to Syria and Lebanon, and we're aware of that. But where does that take us? So are you going to put more sanctions on Iran, which is the most sanctioned country in the world today? Do that. Does that solve any problem? Are you going to physically attack Iran and then deal with the consequences of a wider regional conflict? So I really don't understand where this takes us. Yes, we know that Iran openly supports groups from the Houthis in Yemen, all the way to Hezbollah in Lebanon and Hamas in Gaza. And then, what's the next step? And I keep asking this question because I don't know what happens the day after. I really, this is a time for anyone who loves the region as I do, a time for profound pessimism, where we can talk about destroying Hamas, but we are not willing to explore what happens after that. Yep. In terms of durable peace in the region.
No, again, to that extent, I absolutely agree with Ambassador Suri. If Israel's plan is to go in and cut Hamas off its knees, make sure that Hamas militarily is not in a position ever, as Netanyahu said, for the next 50 years, to be able to launch an attack on Israel like it did on October 7th, you are not going to achieve that by just a military operation. You are certainly not going to achieve that by going in for a military operation, completing that military operation, and then leaving a vacuum behind, because that vacuum is only going to breed another Hamas.